Coming now.
Shalom. Good morning, Rabbi. How are you?
How are you? Nice
Good. Baruch Hashem. Nice to see you too also, Rabbi.
Very
Hope
good.
you are in a good situation over there in Melbourne, Australia.
Well, we are, thank God. I mean, we're waiting for the Messiah, but apart from that, it's all right. It's good. There's plenty of, I mean, we're healthy, thank God. What about you? How's the health situation there?
The health situation here is not really in a good situation overall, Rabbi, for country basis. You know, the Delta variant is really having its spread here in Indonesia.
No, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Rabbi. And the community is struggling. Definitely, the country overall, the health system is basically also still try to struggle, try to strive to be able to support the needs of the people. And then a lot of sad news also happening surrounding my housing complex, 1, 2, and almost every day there is a sad news, Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. But what good news is basically for our community, the Bnei Indonesia, for them who contacted the COVID-19 virus, the variant Delta, they are recovering now. That is the good news, Rabbi.
Well, may you all be well. May there be health for everybody.
Amen.
Please, goodness.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes, indeed.
And we do hope also by learning Torah, the merit of the learning Torah will keep us through, and Hashem will protect us. Of course, we will do also our part to keep our health. But we do believe and we do hope that this merit of learning Torah together with you also will be our merit to pass this everything, and we survive until the Masih comes, Besrat Hashem.
Praise God, and more than survive. We should flourish, should be well.
Amen.
Okay.
Yes, Rabbi.
Good. Now, so today we'll.
Yeah, Rabbi, hold on.
Pardon?
You need to turn on the live transcript, the subtitle, if you want to ensure that the translation is going on well on your side.
Let me just see what I'm supposed to do here.
The next of the record, there is a live transcript. You click there and then you show subtitle.
Okay, I've got some. It says here reactions, record, chat. I don't have live transcript. Oh, now I have. Now I do. Yes.
Yes.
Good. Okay. So show subtitle. Is that right?
Yes, show subtitle, Rabbi. So you will also follow and ensure that the translation is going on and on your end.
Very good. Okay. Well, if anybody feels that they would like to have pauses in the meantime, to ask questions, that's all right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I'll leave it to you. Just give me one moment. Just a second. What? 1 minute. Hang on, just now. All right. All right. Okay. I'm just looking this. Hang on a minute. Yes. All right. Now. Okay. All right. Okay. Now let's start. Good. Okay. So last week I gave a. By the way, before I start, I'll just say one other thing is next Sunday is the 9th of Av, is the fast of the 9th of Av. So I'm afraid there won't be a session then. But then we have to discuss what we're going to the following week. Please goodness, we will continue, and we'll have to. But I will have finished the book, so we'll have to find a new topic. So we can discuss what will be after that. All right. Now, so last week I gave a general introduction to this topic of the question of the treatment of nature. As we know, there is a Noahide law, which is the way in which it's framed is the prohibition of consuming the limb of a living animal. Quite simply, that means that one may not tear a limb from an animal which is alive and consume it without first having killed the animal. Now, as mentioned before, that seems quite a strange thing. Presumably it doesn't happen all that often. Even though I have to tell you that I did see that there were certain places, actually even in Asia, where I think, or in China, I don't know where it was, that people were eating bats which were still living. In other words, this was to consume a living animal like that. That is a full transgression of the consumption of the limb of a living animal. It can also, so anything whereby one, cuts the limb from an animal while it's still alive is transgressing that. This law might also have a practical application in that way, where animals are slaughtered in an abattoir, but they are the animal is cut up while it's still moving. In other words, the animal, if the animal has been killed, it must cease all movement before the flesh is cut from it. If you had a factory, an abattoir, a slaughterhouse, where the animal was killed, and they began immediately to cut it up whilst the animal was moving, then that flesh, that meat, is considered, could well be meat, the limb from a living animal. And so therefore, I don't know, for example, what goes on in slaughterhouses around the world, but one needs to make sure. One needs to confirm that the meat is not cut from the animal until the animal ceased to move altogether. Until it's dead. The animal is not considered dead until it either has stopped all movement or its head has been cut off. So it could be that if the head's cut off and the animal's moving, it's still also considered dead. Now, there is an exception. And that is that the Jewish law of shechita, when the animal has been shechted according to Jewish shechita, which means it's a special, it's cutting with the knife in a very special way, then even if the animal were moving, it's considered as halachically dead, and the meat could be cut from it. However, we do require that the animal cease to, even though that's technically, biblically the case, we do require also that the animal stop all movement. Now, you might ask, based on that in a Muslim country where they have halal, right, halal slaughter, which is also with a knife, maybe you might think that's the same thing as the shechita, which is done under Jewish law with a knife. The answer is it's not the same. The halal slaughter is not the same as shechita, as Jewish shechita, Jewish slaughter. And so therefore, similarly, even where you have halal, the animal will have to have stopped all movement before any meat is cut from it in order to avoid this prohibition. Okay. Now, what we're saying now, so that's just some of those are some of the technical aspects of it. I should mention also that the prohibition of taking the limb from a living animal, that it is a biblical prohibition which relates to warm-blooded animals which are land-based. I suspect it's also, I think, as far as I know, it's also birds. But just 1 second. But it does not apply to fish. Now, just excuse me, just 1 minute. Let me just check something out here. In other words, let me find it here. Sorry. Okay. All right. So this is so the fish. It does not apply. Doesn't apply to fish. However, that does not mean that one can. That does not mean, however, that one should eat fish in a way of cruelty. For example, there are some people in Australia, for example, I've heard that the lobster, for example, the lobster, the lobster is boiled alive, and they pull limbs from it before it's even died. Now, that is not a prohibition of eating the limb of a living animal, but it is because it's a sea creature. But it is an act of cruelty. It's not permitted. It would not be permitted from the standpoint of cruelty to animals. And similarly, I understand that there are some people who eat and it could be a Japanese custom to eat a fish while it's still alive. That is not a prohibition. That does not transgress the prohibition of eating the limb of a living creature, because it's, again, the fish is from the ocean, it's from the sea. But it's cruel, and therefore it should be forbidden on grounds of cruelty. Okay, so that's some of the technical. Those are some of the technical aspects of the prohibition. But I want to explore now the wider implications of this law, because it's whilst the prohibition of eating the limb of a living animal has this very technical aspect that I've just discussed with you, it also relates to cruelty, the cruel treatment of animals. So whether it is, in other words, whether the punishment for treating an animal cruelly is the same as eating a limb from it, it's probably not the same, and there may not be the same penalty for it. Nevertheless, we see clearly from this commandment that cruelty, unnecessary cruelty to animals, is forbidden. But we have to, and there's a very important extension of that, because it says, for example, that when the Torah says that a person, for example, is not allowed to cause him or herself unjustifiable pain. Now, what is unjustifiable pain? For example, allowing somebody to hit one for money. That is no justification. We of course can submit ourselves to pain for a constructive purpose. When we go to the dentist, or there may be pain involved, but that is a constructive purpose. When we go, if a person has to have an operation, a person will have an anesthetic. There can be some procedures that are painful, but they're constructive, so they're allowed. But a person is not allowed to cause themselves unnecessary pain or suffering, and certainly that extends, of course, and just as one may not cause oneself unnecessary pain, so also you're not allowed to treat one's own property, in a destructive manner. Now, from this we can learn out to nature, to what the Torah wants of us with regard to the treatment of animals in general, and of natural resources. Nature can be animal nature, it can be vegetative nature which is growing things, it can be inanimate nature, it can be fuels, materials, and so on and so forth. Now, there is a what we learn from this commandment is that whilst God gave the human being permission to rule over nature, in other words, to make nature serve human purposes, God also said, they also commanded that this not be done with unnecessary cruelty to animals and with unnecessary destructiveness to resources. For example, we're not to cause cruelty to an animal where there is no human benefit at all is forbidden. For us to be entertained by animals which fight each other. When roosters, for example, some people have these so-called cockfights, and things like that, where there is no valid benefit to human beings, and only cruelty comes about to the animals. This is forbidden. Similarly, to go on a ramp to vandalism, to destroy trees, just for its own sake, or to damage, to ravage the landscape for no human purpose, no valid human purpose. This is also forbidden. But on the other hand, we do have the concept that we are allowed to make use of, we are allowed to make use of animals and of nature, even if some degree of pain will result and some degree of destructiveness will remain. And one of the strongest proofs of this is that the human being was permitted to eat animals. Now, to eat an animal, you have to kill it first. And killing involves pain. Some people say that, the killing could be instantaneous, but I think the general idea is that some element of pain is certainly involved in the killing of an animal. So we see here that pain may be caused to an animal, such as by killing it, in order for a human being to benefit. And certainly also, resources can be utilized by people, even though these resources will be depleted. So, and for example, even if it's a good resource, even let us say people are very cold and they haven't got any firewood, and they haven't got a heating system, well, they could theoretically even burn their own furniture to keep warm. That is a destruction of a resource, but it is for a human, but it is for a human purpose. Okay, now. So and of course we may use animals for medical experimentation. This is permitted, and it's very important because now we have sometimes sometimes we have certain environmentalist philosophies which say you're not allowed to kill animals under any circumstances. You're not allowed. They're vegetarian. This is not true according to the Noahide laws. And you have certain people who are, very careful not to cause any suffering at all to animals, or they try and they have some notion that forests should be left intact under all circumstances. Well, that's also wrong, because human beings have to make use of those resources for their own needs. Obviously, we want to be prudent. We don't want to eliminate resources, but the animals are there, and nature is there as an instrument for human purposes. And as I mentioned last week, that doesn't mean that we don't care about nature. We don't care about animals. Rather, as I said last week, in fact, the whole purpose of the use of nature and the use of animals is ultimately for the redemption of nature. It's a very interesting thing, that nature itself is in a state which is not ideal, which is not good, and yet it will be redeemed through ethical human conduct. God will actually alter nature eventually and remove the savagery from nature. And as a matter of fact, I think I mentioned this last time, that it says that in the Holy Temple, the prophet Ezekiel speaks about a stream of water which is going to come out from the temple in the times of Mashiach, and that will go into the oceans and purify all the oceans as well. Very interesting concept. So you see, there's the idea of the cleansing, the purification of nature, and also of the removal of the savagery from nature, the brutality of animals one to another. Anyway, so the idea is, but in the meantime, human beings are perfectly entitled to consume resources and to kill animals for their consumption and to utilize animals for human purposes, valid human purposes, such as medical experimentation and so on and so forth. Nature is not, the environmentalists make a mistake when they think that nature is something which exists for its own sake. This is not true at all. To the contrary, it's the human use of nature which is for the benefit of nature. All right, now, so we have to see also that once again, that whilst we can use these things, we have to at the same time obviously minimize the suffering to animals and minimize the destructiveness in the use of natural resources. So, for example, let me think over here. Let's see. There has to be whatever degree of considerateness can come in. It should be so. We should not be wasteful. And this is because every single thing in creation, apart from the fact that it's sentient and all the animals have feelings and they can experience pain, every single item in nature, every single stone, every single tree, every single leaf was created by God and is renewed in existence by God, and therefore it has a purpose. And we have to think carefully in all of our actions whether we are using nature in a purposeful manner, using animals in a purposeful and considerate manner as well, even though we may use them for these purposes. Now, so there is however an issue. We have to ask ourselves that even though suffering may be inflicted on animals for human benefit and resources may be consumed for human benefit or destroyed for human benefit, we have to ask ourselves at the same time whether our purposes themselves are sufficient to justify the suffering of the animal. And I'll give you some examples of that. For example, I don't know if anybody wears a fur coat in Indonesia. Maybe the temperature there is it's warm all year round. But in colder countries, people wear fur coats sometimes. Now, sometimes furs are obtained from animals in very cruel ways. For example, the animal could be skinned alive, or another way, in another situation, for example, an animal which has a desirable fur, it's beaten to death, because if the animal would be cut by a knife, it would spoil the fur. Now, one of the rabbis in Israel ruled that we may not have such fur coats, because it's okay. We like to be warm, but we don't need a fur coat at the expense of such suffering from the animal, an animal which was killed in a particularly cruel way. Similarly, there may be certain delicacies, certain foods, which are, I haven't seen it myself, but there was the meat of certain calves, veal, which is produced, which has a special quality when the animal is kept in darkness. Now that is a very cruel thing to do to an animal just for it to have an extra tasty piece of meat. But we can have ordinary meat. We don't have to have meat with delicacies of that nature. That's not warranted. Delicacies of that nature where such suffering was brought on the animal. It's not the use does not justify, the value does not justify the suffering done to the animal. Hunting. What about hunting animals for pleasure? Well, I think I think it's very questionable whether hunting is justifiable. Just hunting for pleasure, where one doesn't eat the animal but just kills it as a sport. It seems to me that this is a very questionable activity, because the entertainment which the person has from this is not sufficiently meritorious, is not sufficiently great to warrant that kind of cruelty. And so these are difficult situations. Now, for example, a practical issue. I don't know I just touched something. I don't know what it was. Yeah. For example, we have in many countries, eggs are produced by hens which are in cages. The battery hens. Now, there are some people who say that this is bad, and we should not, and it's cruel. And I'm sure there is some degree of suffering. There's no question. There's some degree of suffering to a hen which spends its life in a cage, as distinct from being able to walk around. However, on the other hand, cage eggs which are produced by hens which are in cages are much cheaper than the eggs which are produced by birds which are able to walk around, because it's less because you need presumably more space for the birds, and there's time involved in collecting the eggs and so on and so forth. And so that's called free range eggs. Are we allowed to eat eggs which are produced by hens in cages? Well, I think the answer is yes, we are, because the eggs which are produced in cages are significantly cheaper, and for people who are economically hard put, in other words, the people who do not have much money, there is a significant economic benefit from those eggs, even though it involves more suffering from the animal itself, from the bird itself. So so whilst it might be meritorious, it might be desirable to eat the other eggs, but still, if there are strong reasons, good reasons for eating the eggs which come in cages and which are more desirable for various reasons, they're cheaper and so on and so forth, then it should be allowed, because the human being is permitted to inflict some degree of suffering on the animal if there is a valid human purpose. If the human purpose, as I mentioned before, is a more trivial one, like just simply having a delicacy, or having a fur coat which can be replaced by an ordinary coat, then that doesn't necessarily justify the extraordinary suffering to which the animals might be subjected. Okay, now what about the saving animals from pain? We said before, we're not allowed to inflict unnecessary pain on an animal. Pain which serves a purpose, for example, killing the animal to eat it, experimenting on the animal to test a medicine, all of that is allowed. Inflicting unnecessary pain on an animal, for example, just to be cruel to an animal, to beat it, or to use it for sports and entertainments which are of little value, that shouldn't be allowed. But and similarly, resources, we are allowed to consume resources, but not necessarily. But we should do it with as carefully as possible, with as little unnecessary destruction as possible, not to pollute waterways. In other words, and so on and so forth. This is something which should obviously be avoided. if there is a way to dispose of chemicals other than putting into water, into rivers, and into the sea, well, it's clearly this one should do it. One should take the alternative method. But particularly if it's going to kill fish and do things of that sort, which are in the sea. But what about the other question? Do I have to be? Is it required of us to actually show kindness to an animal? In other words, it's one thing not to hurt the animal, but do we have to save an animal? Do we have to do we have to treat an animal with kindness? Well, I'll give some examples. For example, one of the examples we see in the Bible is where a donkey collapses under its load. It can't carry the load, and it collapses. So there is a Jewish commandment there to unload the animal, so that the animal, because of the pain, even though I didn't cause the pain, it could be somebody else's animal, but still it's me to unload that animal. And there are various other Jewish commandments which are there to alleviate the pain of an animal. So, for example, let me just think what we have. Yeah, let's say the alleviation of pain of an animal. Even though I'm not getting I'm not doing. So what's the situation there? Well, for example, we have a whole host. We don't, for example, to muzzle an animal while it's threshing, while it's threshing grain. It's walking on the grain, it's crushing, it's turning a mill, or it's actually threshing the grain which it walks on. Is that permitted? If you muzzle the animal, you don't let the animal to eat. So there's a Jewish commandment not to muzzle the animal, to let the animal eat at the same time. When we take the birds, take the birds from a nest, the eggs from a nest, not a chicken, because you see a bird in a tree and you want to take the eggs. Should you shoo away the mother bird first of all, so it doesn't experience any pain and so on? These are positive measures to alleviate the pain of an animal. Anyway, so I think the bottom line is, whilst this is a different, because we're not talking here about cruelty, we're talking here about easing the situation of the animal. I think we have to say that it's a good quality. It's a rational thing to do. It's not the same thing as it's not mandatory, perhaps, but it is desirable, highly desirable, that we should show consideration for animals, even if they're not our own animals, and even when we see that they are in pain. All right. Then there is what about things like recycling? Oh, is there an obligation to recycle resources and so on and so forth? Well, it's obviously a desirable thing, but in other words, to conserve resources. However, this does not necessarily mean that we have to perform extreme acts of conservation, which would harm human livelihood. In other words, for example, this is one of the issues we have at the moment. There is an issue of burning coal. So people's coal pollutes more than other forms of energy. But what happens if the alternative energy sources are going to drive the price of energy right up? Coal is not as expensive as others. So here, it's not clear at all to say, it doesn't seem necessary that we must necessarily say that we have to use the more expensive form of energy. After all, human needs are primary. And it's not just that we need warmth, but we need economic warmth. We need warmth which is not costly. So this idea that we have to that conservation, whilst it's a sensible thing to do, It doesn't have to be pursued at all costs. All right. Now, and similarly, therefore we see that destroying something for no good purpose, that's not allowed. Causing pain to an animal for no good purpose is also not allowed. But we don't necessarily have to go out of our way to serve an ecosystem, so to speak, where it has a in other words, where it doesn't bear on human, where it does not bear directly on human needs, where it's not, where it's outside the consideration of human needs. Okay. Now there are other elements here which relate to the treatment of nature. One thing is that that under Noahide law, one should not cross-breed species of animals. Hashem created nature with a purpose for each species, and to alter the identity of the species is something which is forbidden. Now, you could use genetic engineering and modification to improve a species, but to crossbreed species, this is something which is not permitted. Similarly, the idea of grafting trees, of grafting one species of tree onto another, that's also something which we shouldn't do. Now, what happens if we already have fruits which are hybrids? For example, in Australia we have something called a nectarine. A nectarine is a hybrid of a peach and a plum. Now, this was already been done, but we're allowed to eat it. If somebody, it's already been generated. But to do such a thing in the first place is actually forbidden. To blend species, to crossbreed, to break down the barriers between species in this particular way, is something which is also not allowed. And this is because, as mentioned before, Hashem created every species with its purpose. Everything in the world has a purpose. Now, we may not always know what that purpose is, but we have to respect the idea that everything has been created for a reason by its creator, and whilst God gave us permission to use them, we may not go and alter their fundamental identities. You're not allowed to create a new species of animal, and so on, or a new species of fruit in the first instance. If it happened, you can use it, but we may not go ahead and do it in the first place. All right, so I think that basically I've covered a number of topics here. It's a very important topic. As I said, it looks like a very limited concept, just not eat the limit of the living animal, but we see that it extends to and it guides our usage of our treatment of animals in general and our relationship to nature in general. And as I mentioned last time, we need to be very careful about this, because there are people who are the Western environmentalism has very often been tied to false values, to false ideologies, to the notion that, as I discussed last time, and we have to make sure that the care for nature does not get sidetracked and hijacked for other purposes. But in general, Torah is concerned to treat animals and resources carefully, but to know that they are there for human purposes, valid, ethical human purposes. Okay, so any questions now? Maybe we'll have some questions there. Leo, you hear me? Hello? Can you hear me? I can't. Leo, can you hear? I can't. Do you want to unmute yourself, Leo? You're muted.
No, I was lost just now. My
Okay.
connection was off, Rabbi, but now I get you back. No problem.
Okay, I'm happy to answer questions now.
Oke, great. So, jadi Bapak Ibu sekalian, kita sudah selesai. Rabbi sudah memaparkan banyak hal terkait dengan hukum yang terakhir, yaitu larangan makan dari daging binatang yang masih hidup, dan ternyata ini luas sekali, ya, yaitu terkait dengan bagaimana manusia memperlakukan alam semesta. Nah, sekarang Rabbi membuka kesempatan untuk bertanya. Apakah ada dari Bapak Ibu saudara sekalian yang ingin bertanya? Silakan. Ayo, jangan membuang waktunya karena Rabbi tidak bisa lama-lama beserta dengan kita. Silakan.
Pak Leo, saya tanya Pak Leo.
Silakan Pak Yohanes Senggi.
Nah, jadi yang saya mau tanya seperti misalnya tikus di rumah itu sebagai hama ya. Itu apakah kita bunuh atau kita racun dengan biasanya pakai racun yang ada atau seperti itu ya?
Pakai perangkap tikus atau pakai racun gitu ya?
Ya, perangkap atau seperti perangkap. Terus bagaimana juga dengan orang yang berburu tapi berburu hewan untuk dimakan, ada dengan cara menjerat, bikin perangkap dijerat, mungkin ada yang kena kaki atau kena leher, biasanya begitu. Itu bagaimana untuk dikonsumsi ya? Makasih.
Siap, baik. Yang lain nanti segera siapkan ya. Saya akan ucapkan dulu pertanyaannya dan Rabbi akan menjawab. Yang lain siap-siap dengan pertanyaannya. Baik, Rabbi, there are two questions over here. First is about, like, for example, the mouse or rat, which is pesting the house. Of course, like disturbing our house. Are we allowed to kill by poison or whatever it is, right? How Torah regulate us on that? That's number one questions. Number two, how about if people in the modern day right now go hunting and for the purpose of meat, because this person, for example, saying live in a village, want to have a deer meat, something like that, and then he go hunt either by spear or by gun or maybe by a net, something like that. How is that according to the Torah view?
Good. The answer is, first of all, with regard to the mice and the rats, we're certainly allowed to kill them, because the very fact that they are a nuisance to us, to get rid of that nuisance, that's a valid human purpose. There's no question about that whatsoever. You can, for example, if you've got mosquitoes and flies, you can kill them because they are distressing. They're a source of distress. And if it's a dangerous insect like a spider or things of that sort, you are most certainly allowed to kill it. You're allowed to kill it for that purpose. If I was just outside on the footpath and I saw a spider or an ant, I think, and I wanted to kill it, and there was no danger to me. It posed no nuisance to me and no danger to me. Then I doubt that you should do it. But if it causes distress to me in my own home and it is a nuisance, there's no question. You're certainly allowed to kill them for that. That's a valid human purpose. Now, so about the hunting, yes. Well, if a person is hunting for food, most certainly, that is permitted. Of course, it is certainly permitted. The hunting which I said was not permitted is hunting which is for entertainment. For example, where people just go on hunts not for food, but because it is a sport for them to kill animals. And they don't eat the animal. They don't use its fur. They make no use of it, but simply kill it for entertainment. I believe that is wrong from a Torah point of view.
Oke. Saya sudah terjemahkan juga. Pertanyaan berikutnya ada lagi, Bapak Ibu sekalian, silakan. Pertanyaan berikutnya.
Saya nanya Pak Leo.
Ya, silakan Adrian.
Terkait tadi kan dijelaskan ayam yang dipelihara di kandang itu biayanya lebih murah. Ada satu sistem peternakan ayam yang close house itu kan Pak Leo. Jadi tadi kan saya kurang jelas di bagian ini. Kalau tadi dijelaskan ayamnya itu memang secara biaya lebih murah, tetapi kalau di kandang itu kan lebih menderita. ayamnya. Nah, tapi kalau sistem close house itu kan yang tertutup sama sekali itu diklaim bahwa ayamnya berkurang stresnya. Nah, kalau yang seperti ini masih boleh dikonsumsi atau tidak? Terima kasih. Kalau tadi kayaknya boleh ya. Saya kurang jelas sih Pak Leo. Terima kasih.
Yeah, Rabbi, it's just to emphasizing actually that even if we have the chicken farm for to harvest the egg, and the chicken is placed in a confined cage, it is allowed because it has a very significant economical scale to produce that's we allow. But then if a person have a chicken and then not put in a cage but in a closed maybe area, like for example 10 or 50 by 50 meters, and then let them there free range, quote unquote, in a limited way, so that is also allowed. Am I correct?
Of course it's allowed. It's probably it's a greater kindness to the birds. They certainly allowed. And the point is that those eggs are going to be more expensive, right? Because they take more to produce. So it's, of course, how much more so is it permitted? But the point I wanted to make is that even where bird suffers to some degree in the cage, that can be permitted because of the economic benefit.
Ya. Oke, satu pertanyaan terakhir ada, Bapak Ibu sekalian? Silakan.
Ya, saya nanya More.
Silakan.
Halo.
Oke, Pak Yuri dulu, sebentar Pak Tukino. Habis Pak Yuri, Pak Tukino. Silakan.
More, kalau kita itu kan ada peliharaan, contohnya kucing. Terus kita main-main sama kucing, apakah bisa tergolong kekejaman atau hanya bercanda begitu?
Kita punya binatang peliharaan seperti kucing misalkan di rumah gitu ya, itu binatang peliharaan kita gitu ya Pak ya?
Iya.
Lalu kita main-main, nah main-mainnya itu gimana dulu Pak?
Nggak kasar sih.
Oh, kasarnya contohnya seperti apa?
Sampai kayak kucing kayak kesakitan begitu.
Oh, oke. Ya mungkin dipukulin gitu.
Cuman cubit begitu.
Oh, dilempar-lempar, dicubit-cubit gitu. Oke.
Yeah.
Alright. Okay. Rabbi, the question is about the pet that we have in our home. To what extent we can play with this pet? Is it maybe sometimes because if we got too excited with the pet, then we might harm the pet. So how is it, Rabbi?
Well, I suppose that I don't know exactly what the exact situation is there, but obviously an animal should not be treated with cruelty. You have to be careful that you're not going to cause the animal harm. I mean, there's no there is to tease an animal. Obviously, is not appropriate. To annoy the animal would not be a good thing. To get the animal into a state where the animal will be disturbed. It's not. There needs to be a considerate treatment of the animal. But there's actually. Let me raise one other point. Well, sometimes an animal becomes very sick, right? Now the question there is: are you allowed to have the animal killed, put to or the drug? In other words, we say in Australia, to put to sleep, put the animal down. A very old dog or something like that, which is very hard to look after, or a horse or a donkey or whatever it is, the animal is no longer able to work. Are you allowed to go to the veterinarian, the animal doctor, and have the animal put down? In other words, the answer is yes, you are, because it may be that animal, it is a burden for the human being to care for that animal at this point of time, and that may also be a valid human purpose. if the animal is now so sick or so old that it cannot now be that it's a burden on the human being. Sometimes they put an old horse out simply to graze, until it dies. Okay, but it could be that the animal is, okay, maybe that's appropriate. It's kinder than having the animal put down. But as I mentioned before, an animal which is very sick, and it can be put down, but not so much for the sake of the animal. We don't have the animal killed because we say this is better for the animal necessarily, because we can't. It's not for us to judge, what's best for the animal. Just like a human being, maybe life is good for the human being as long as the human being is alive. We say you're not allowed to kill the human being. That's because human life is sacred. But we don't necessarily, about an animal, we don't think in those terms. It's not for us to judge. We're not the judge whether that animal should die for its own sake. Our judge, it is correct. We make the consideration of whether it is a burden on us, whether it is of human value for the animal to be put down. So I wasn't asked that question, but I thought I would mention it anyway.
Oke, satu pertanyaan terakhir, silakan Pak Tukino.
Ya, ini dengan anaknya tiap nitip pertanyaan. Kalau ayam kemarin kan udah dijelasin tapi lupa, kawin silang itu maksudnya ayam dengan kambing atau ayam A jenis A atau ayam jenis B gitu, misalnya broiler dengan kampung atau misalnya bangkok dengan mana gitu. Kemudian yang kedua, kita memelihara cacing untuk dikasihkan makan ke ayam sebagai sumber protein, itu diperbolehkan enggak? Terus ketiga, kalau meninggal itu ayam itu menjadi apa ya gitu?
Jadi Kentucky Fried Chicken, Pak.
Ya, misalnya ayam itu kan kalau manusia kan ada nesama, kan ayam gak ada nesama dia langsung hilang gitu aja di alam atau seperti apa itu?
Iya, paham. Oke. Jadi Kentucky Fried Chicken saya bilang.
Jadi Kentucky Fried Chicken boleh. Jadi apa ya?
Okay, Rabbi, a question. There are three questions. First one, if you can elaborate what kind of crossbreeding that is not allowed. Like for example, is it between dog and chicken, or it's between maybe chicken and wolf, or what kind of crossbreeding that is not allowed? A short explanation is needed there. That's number one. Second, how about if we cultivate a worm? A worm is a living thing. A worm is an animal, but the purpose of cultivate the worm is to feed the chicken. Okay, is that allowed? Number two, and then the third is we know that the human has a neshama, and then when we die, then our neshama goes back to Hashem. How about the animal? What happened after they die?
Very good question. Okay, all right. So the first question is about crossbreeding species. Look, I'm not complete. It's a little bit technical because sometimes you have species which are really members of the one family. I can't answer that question abstractly, but I would say that a wolf and a dog, that would be two species without any question. A horse and a donkey, there are two species, right? I'm not sure about different strains of dogs. I don't know. I have to look into that. I can't answer you. I need to research that point. But generally speaking, the most common case would be a mule to crossbreed a horse and a donkey. That would certainly be forbidden, right? That is a mule. What happens is, once again, if somebody's already got a mule, can you buy them? Can you use them? Yes, the answer is you can use it, but you can't. Because it's there. You can make use of it, but you can't, in the first instance, breed them. And as I say, but so obviously the best thing is try not to crossbreed anything at all. even those which are very, very closely related species, I would say. But I need to check on that other point first of all. In other words, between different kinds of dogs, I'm not sure. I have to look into it. Now, the second question is worms. I see no problem in cultivating worms to feed other animals. So, I mean, after all, we raise animals in order to eat them ourselves. So where the consumption of animals is permitted, and it's of a human benefit here. So I don't see any issue with it whatsoever of raising it. And after all, for example, dogs are fed meat, right? The dogs are fed meat, and the cats are sometimes fed fish. So there seems to be not an issue there. It's not a problem. I'm trying to remember, what was the third? The third question was, just remind me, please, what the third question was.
The third question is about is the animal have a soul, and what happened?
Oh, the soul, yes, sorry. No, I remember, yes, sorry. Should have written that. Yeah, I don't think that the animal does not have a soul like a human being. That's for certain. Because only the human being, it says about the human being was made in the image of God. And that refers to the soul, and that's only a human being. Now, so does the animal have some spiritual element? Maybe it does. I mean, for example, we saw that the animals, that there is some spiritual recognition by all creatures. Every living creature is created by God, and it has some sort of a spark in it, which is its divine life force. And I think we have to say that divine life force, which is in every creature, has some kind of a recognition of God. It's not like a human being, but it's not a soul like a human soul. That will, for example, that I don't think it is not meaningful to say that an animal will be resurrected. A human being can be resurrected, but not an animal. So the answer is a spark of recognition of God, yes, but a soul, no. Maybe we have to stop here, okay. Leo.
Yes, Rabbi.
Okay, so in a fortnight's time, please goodness, and maybe we'll have some discussion before that as to what we should, in advance,
cover.
What the next group of classes will be about.
I agree,
okay.
Rabbi.
Well, nice to
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Be well. Have a good day for you there. Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All the best. Bye-bye.
Oke, terima kasih semua. Terima kasih ya Bapak Saudara sekalian.
Terima kasih semuanya.
Terjemahan juga sudah diberikan, dan untuk member komunitas BNI Indonesia nanti malam kita ada lanjutan sesi yang sangat luar biasa, yaitu Tehilim pasal yang ke-9. Kita akan dibuat meledak lagi kepala kita dengan hikmat dari Torah. Baruch Hashem, sampai jumpa nanti. Om Leitraut.
Saudara